Welcome to When Spreadsheets Hit the Fan, a Birdview podcast. This is a show for leaders in fast-growing professional service organizations looking for the latest conversations around service delivery best practices. Let's get into the show.
Hello and welcome to When Spreadsheets Hit the Fan. I'm your host, John Litterick. In today's episode, I talked to Hector Giner. Hector is the co-founder of Z1, which is an awarded digital product studio whose team of almost 100 digital crafters has helped more than 150 startup founders and experienced companies from around the world build products that launch their businesses into the market. Hector has a background in engineering, product management, and visual design. A fun fact about Hector is that apart from being a founder of and CEO, he's also a father of two, and he's also a musician playing both drums and guitar. He's even had some records produced with his band Marvin Green. An interesting fact about his company Z1 is that in 2018, the studio was acquired by Canadian fund Tiny, behind giants like MetaLab or Dribbble, and this has led to unstoppable growth for Z1. Another interesting fact about Z1 is that some of the products that they've helped companies design and develop from the ground up have actually been featured in massive media in, newspapers such as the New York Times or TechCrunch. And you won't find their name there, but they've been part of the process. So with all that experience helping startups, today, Hector wants to talk about the dangers of leaders focusing on outputs rather than outcomes. And of course, Hector will share a spreadsheet story. So if you like what you hear, please follow the show and leave a rating wherever you're listening. Let's jump right into it. Hector, really happy to have you on. You have a very interesting company. You have a lot of experience, leading a professional services organization. I always start the interview off with this question, okay? What is the biggest mistake that you see organizations making, and what should they stop doing right away?
Yeah, simplifying, I would say that, and this is a very natural thing, right? Thinking about solutions before understanding the right problems to solve. And that happens in a lot of levels, right? If you think about marketing, if you think about product that we're experts in, or you think about even internal workflows, very common to, as soon as you detect something that is not working properly, everything starts from there. But if we're not very intending to do it properly, it's very common to jump into solutions, thinking about or proposing solutions and things like that before understanding what's happening, if what we're seeing is the root cause of what's happening there, or if it's a symptom, or if it's something unrelated, right? So I would say that that's it. If we want to simplify and have it super clear, is that, thinking in solutions before understanding properly what we are trying to solve. And that happens in all the levels or areas of a company. Yeah.
Okay. So can you give me a specific example of where you've seen this mistake? And, our listeners always want to understand in a tangible way, what were the negative impacts? But there's also intangible things like brand and reputation. So can you talk about, time that you've seen this mistake and kind of what the impact was, both tangibly and intangibly? And we're talking the negative impact, of course.
Yeah, well, I would like to highlight the case where, we are working daily on that, right? Like we're supporting entrepreneurs and technology companies along the way of building products, what we call digital experiences. And actually, it's a space where this trap is very present, right? Because it's very common that you either fall in love with your product or solution, or you have the illusion of something that will work, or you are your user and you think about things that will work for everyone. So it's very common that when we are like shaping up this product, like, founders or teams are adding a lot of features, a lot of functionality in that at the end of the day, the end user will validate if it's valuable or not. I would say that this is pretty related to what I said before, like thinking about something regarding solutions or regarding functionality or features in a product before understanding the problems or the jobs to be done, right? Actually, it's a framework that I usually use even for all the areas of the company, not only product. So at the end of the day, is understanding what we're trying to achieve and why, and then shape the solutions and ultimately validate it with users or the daily work or teammates. So it's very common that this is happening in the technology space in startups. And actually, there's a lot of books, articles, podcasts about this, about prioritizing, building as minimum as possible, incrementally validating, right, in order to not fall in this trap. Then I would say that the main negative impact or in brand reputation or even company wise is like at the end of the day, everything can be analyzing in terms of time and resources, right? So we don't have unlimited time, we don't have unlimited resources. When you are deciding in this space, for example, building a feature, in some way you're making a trade-off, right? Like there's a feature that you're building and there's another one that you're not building. So not doing the right process, not doing the right decision and this, at the end of the day, always have a cost. Sometimes it's not critical, it's not consequential, it's like something that you just can do it. But sometimes if you work in isolation for a long time, yeah, it can have like a super negative impact on resources, time, and sometimes can be even problem of opportunity cost, right? And that's always related to brand reputation and how users perceive the value of the brand.
All right, excellent. So if people are, like you said, entrepreneurs, startups, if they're not doing this sort of evidence-based approach that you're talking about, but like you said, they're entrenched and they're in love with their original idea, what should they do instead? Like, how should they get out of that mindset? What is the approach they should take?
Yeah, there's something that is not new, right? Like if we think about lean, agile, design thinking, sprint methodology, I mean, these are tools and processes that have been around for a decade now, probably. Yeah, even more. So it's about, like iterations, right? Like quickly building things, validating with users, maybe in a prototype stage or maybe with the real product at some point. But it's usually the main process, and it's not probably a matter for this conversation to go into the specific details of each process itself, but I think is because there are like two main benefits. One is because when you are building things, when you're shaping up products, during the process you discover more things, or even you realize that something could be valuable and trying to diverge from the original idea and test other things, right? And that's something that is always good, but also like to be adapted to that level of change. But the other thing as well is that I think it's very important to, while iterating quickly, you can fail quickly because, I mean, and this is more probably related to my personal view of the world and how we're building companies and products. Like in some way we have experience, we have knowledge, but I mean, there are a lot of people saying that we are all like adult people, like figuring it out. So there is something real behind that in the business side. So by doing this stuff, like doing rapidly, testing rapidly, and building things rapidly, you have more chances to do the right thing because you can create your course easily and you can adapt to it for change easier. And that, if we compare it to just being in isolation, working for 1 year in a marvelous idea and not talking to anyone, it's not only that probably that idea maybe is not the best one, it's also like how you have limited the input that you can receive from other people that will be very valuable for your product, and also the time, as we mentioned before. So I would say in summary, it's about doing things quickly, be more experimental. That's another thing that is very important. Like even if you have a good idea, for example, let's think about something internal, a workflow, new workflow for process, and I don't know, for signing contracts and then sending for from marketing to sales, wherever. It's always good to have an experimental mindset. Like, okay, we understand the problem, we have created a solution. Instead of adopting that solution at 200% all company at the same time, it's like, why don't we run this solution in one case, review the input, review the output, and validate the idea and improve it, right? So even for things that you maybe are doing right, it's always good to have this experimental way of doing it, right? So I was referring also that sometimes when we're defining objectives for companies like OKRs, for example, I like the idea. I remember talking with people very experts in this field, like thinking that objectives can be defined as something that you want to achieve, and that's okay. But I like more the idea of setting up as objective something that you want to validate in some way. Like, okay, I want to know if I'm correct when I'm thinking about this in these terms. So the key results will be this to validate the objective, right? So even the mindset change on saying like, okay, we will try things in order to see if we are in the right path to solve something, or we have to change, adapt, and craft something new. Probably that's the summary of how to do things differently.
Great. Well, there's a lot of information there. We might later on get you to break it down a little bit more. Okay, this is the part of the show where I challenge the guests to boil everything they're down into a simple one sentence statement. What would they stop doing and what would they start doing? Are you up for the challenge? Do you think you could do it?
Yeah, actually, I will use a claim that we have internally in the company, even for clients and for our own teams. As a services company, but I think it's applicable to any business. I think it's very important to stop thinking in outputs, start thinking in outcomes. I think that summarizes perfectly even my lifestyle, I would say, and how I try to live my life, right? Like thinking about what we're trying to achieve and why, and not just like proving and confirming that we have done things. That because that's not the right thing to do, right? Like it's more about thinking what you're achieving, right? It's similar to when we're thinking about, I don't know, like schedules. It's more important to do the right things, the right task, and achieve nice goals than just working 16 hours a day because of, nothing, right? Just doing it. Here is the same. A company can be just doing a lot of stuff and not or never thinking about the outcome that we're trying to achieve. Yeah.
Okay, so just to make sure I caught it, stop thinking in outputs and start thinking in outcomes. That's the statement? Perfect. All right. Yeah, that I want to make a little commentary on that. That resonates with me. I've been doing IT sales for 25 years, and I've seen where there's a focus on, outreach, 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 but no meetings come in, right? And so there's lots of output, lots of productivity, but the goal, the outcome was to get a meeting, and that's not happening. And I've watched other people do something very simple, work for 5 minutes in a day and get 4 meetings because they were focused on the outcome versus the output. So I think anybody can apply that in any field. I like that. And I like that you say it's true in your life, your personal life as well. So I'm just going to reiterate one more time. Stop thinking in outputs and start thinking in outcomes. So I do like that. That was really well done. Okay. So you've jumped ahead a lot. You got into a lot of the how, which is what I usually ask at the end. So I'm going to steal that time that I would normally take from the how, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the theory. And here's what I think is always interesting. Most of our guests, pretty much what they want to talk about is common sense, but the mistakes are happening. The bad behaviors are happening. The good behaviors are not. So I always ask this question: why do you think so many organizations get caught into this trap where they think outputs and not outcomes? Why do you think it's happening so much? What do you think drives that?
Yeah, I feel like something that I always try to think about is like, and this is from a great book I read a couple of years ago from by Aaron Dinian, like Brave New Work, new ways to work in organizations. And I really like the idea that the difference between something that is complicated and something that is complex. So the complicated things, if you have a manual, have, I don't know, getting started manual or something, you at the end of the day you can complete it, like you can manage perfectly, right? But something complex can be only managed, right? You never have control over it, right? And that's honestly that's overwhelming, right, for a human being. And I would say that people, everything related to people, everything related to markets, and everything related to something outside your company as well, in some ways complex. It's not complicated, right? It's something that you never have 100% of control over. So the natural reaction is to simplify, or to think that we can just simplify the reality, we will have the same outcomes. So it's instead of facing the challenge of, oh, I'm having a lot of calls, sales calls, as you said before, and I'm not closing anything, to just focus on, well, I'll do 12 calls a day and wherever happens. And because that's easier, that's, is a comfortable place to be, more than understand, okay, there's something here that we don't understand, it's not working, and we have to create. And that's one thing. I think it's more like the natural part of us. We tend to think that reality is simple and it's not. And the other thing is sometimes, especially depending on the size of a company, when companies are bigger, and it's something that in some way we are seeing at said one right now because over like 100 people, there are like some processes, positions, reactions that are or become standard, become like a virtue signal, something that is good to do, even if we're not thinking if it's valuable or not. People feel comfortable in those things. I mean, I always have an example with my co-founder Carlos. When I have a clean inbox on my email, I don't know why, but I think that everything is nice with the company. Everything is solved, and that maybe that's not real because probably some fires and some problems are in other parts of the company. This usually happens in companies. Like people, they look at their areas, they look at what they have control over, simplify, and keep doing the same thing because adopting a more open, more creative, and more complexity-oriented vision is finally more difficult. I would say that this relates also to the law of minimum energy, right? So yeah, that's probably a cause. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the pandemic is the most recent exposure of that. The companies that were able to incrementally figure out like how could they change their business model, many of them it was a very successful experience for them. And I think I once read a book on volatility, and it was similar, you know, that we as human beings want to simplify, and we want to like say that when an event happens, everybody rows the same way in the boat, but they don't. It was giving an example in the stock market that when say like an oil tanker spills its oil out all over the ocean, your mind simplifies it and thinks, well, the stock's going to crash. But there's a whole complex world out there like that goes on. Some people start to sell, that triggers automated AI machines to buy. And there are lots of instances where, you know, disasters happened and the stock is up 3% by the end of the day. And you scratch your head and you think, well, how could that have happened? And so the thing, though, is that if you sort of watch the behavior of that company probably over a year, the stock will be down as the volatility goes out. And so what you're saying, if you focus on outcomes, you keep sticking with the outcome. What do you want? What do you want? You keep iteratively looking at it. The volatility will dissipate and you'll probably get that outcome, right? If that sales rep that keeps thinking about like, well, the goal is to get the meeting, the barrage of outreach isn't working, so I'll try something else. Doesn't work, I'll try something else. Doesn't work. They keep the outcome in mind, they eventually will hit on a way to get the meetings. And this is a simple example from my world. So
I would say also that the organization level, it's very important, and probably this is something that we can go deeper later, but it's very important as well to have incentives in place, right? To create this type of behaviors, right? Because sometimes what I would like to highlight as well is like sometimes people behave in a way that is just related to the incentive plan, right? Like if there is no incentive to be creative, is not incentive to really think about value and just, I mean, if your incentive plan is based on coming back to the sales example, just the number of calls that you do and not what you achieve with them, I mean, you shouldn't expect something different from that behavior, right? So I think that's very important as well, right? At a company level, trying to think about what we're trying to achieve as a group and also individually, right? And try to align the incentive. I'm not directly talking about the incentive plan and economic incentive plan. Is also like how you incentivize that behavior inside the organization.
yeah, this has been a really interesting conversation. I'm gonna jump ahead, I think. And Hector, we talked a little bit about how you like Jake Knapp's book Sprint. Let's talk about your four-step action plan, the one that you've talked to me about, opportunity space. Let's talk about your four-step action plan to be outcome-based thinking in terms of like output based. Let's go there. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, firstly, a simple note on Jake Knapp's Sprint is that it's a book that I reread from time to time, right? Like, and I think it's a very good book to understand. In some ways, like a summary of all these practices that we have mentioned before, right? Yeah, it's not a real methodology with a lot of non-name, right, that everyone knows. But when you read about the steps, the tasks, the process, in some ways, like a summary of all this design thinking, agile, leaning, prototyping is like everything at once in 1 week, right? Then you can apply it in 1, 2, 3 weeks. Is more a mindset, right? So yeah, following to that, I think that, I mean, reading other books more deeper on product management, product strategy, right? Digital product. I landed in this concept of opportunity space, solution space, because the discovery term is something that has been used for a long time, right? Especially in services company. Oh, we need to run a discovery, or people doing discovery for projects and that. I started like reading about this, and I like the idea of even thinking about discovery or research, to even think about the different steps that you have to go through in order to create a solution that makes sense. And I don't think the terms are important here. I think that the steps are the important ones. And also, I have a personal initiative that I'm crafting internally for myself, because I'm seeing all these methodologies around, and I'm crafting my own strategic initiative. I will never write a book about it, but in some way I see similarities in all these practices that at the end of the day is similar, right? So yeah, basically the 4 steps are about when we're running to a discovery process, what we're trying ultimately, if we're thinking about a digital experience, but this is applicable to anything that we want to craft, a new plan for, I don't know, workflows in the company, or a marketing strategy, or something for any area. There are always 4 steps. The main 2 first steps are for deciding what to do and how to do it. And the 2 last is like building it and creating some feedback loops in order to perform better and build a better solution. So if we use these terms about opportunity space, I like the idea of having firstly the opportunity space, then the solution space, and then the different sub steps on the solution space. So the opportunity space is more about what we said before. We have a problem. A problem can be a problem or an opportunity, right? We can think that there's an opportunity in the market and we want to capture it, catch it. So either a problem, either an opportunity. The first thing that we have to do is to understand it properly. Understand what are the nuances there, what are the end user, how we can create value there, how to understand if it's a problem, what we're trying to solve ultimately, not as a symptom. If it's an opportunity, understanding the job to be done, right? That what's the real driver of our users to really get the value on this potential solution, right? So by doing that process and only thinking about the opportunity space, the problem or the opportunity, we do a right exercise of also involving more people, right? Because the problem that we were mentioning before is that if we jump into solutions like super rapidly, also the character, the personality of the different people in the team will impact the potential solutions. Because if some people are more extrovert or more charismatic, right, and they propose a solution, is probably the odds are that someone that is not as charismatic as that person probably doesn't propose anything, right? Or something like that, right? So it's good to have a space, firstly, where we open all the opportunities. It's more about understanding the problem, talking about the real things to do, and allowing everyone to participate in that, right? And also in that process of running the discovery process, we allow people to create some sort of bonds in order to create a solution that everyone buys, right? Like everyone is adopting potentially, but because that's another problem that can we can have in the future as well, right? If the solution is just created by one person or two people and not the rest of the team. So then once we have we have identified the right problem, we understand, we have made the right questions, right? We can always think in the opportunity space as a question space, right? Questioning everything. So then we start with to the solution space. We have done a lot of work on understanding everything properly, and now for the opportunities or problems that we want to solve, now we jump into solutions and we decide what are the feasible solutions, what are the solutions that will bring more value to the user, and we make decisions and in terms of trade-offs and resources, timing, and all of that, right? But always splitting in two, right? And that can be still in a written format, right? It's still like a whiteboard, it's still like sticky notes, right? We're still thinking about the overall terms. And now we can define a blur line that then we go still in the solution space, but now we can think about design and development, right? Design is an overall term, is not just interface design. We can design a workflow, we can design a strategy, we can design wherever. So now we jump into designing a solution, creating a solution that we think is the best, but based on what we have run into the discovery process, right? And once we design it, we confirm that everything is feasible and we build it. If it's a product, will be the coding part. If it's marketing strategy, it will be creating the ads or materials or copy, right? So those are finally the four steps, right? And I was also thinking for this conversation about more abstract terms for these four steps. And I also like the idea of the first step is understanding. Understanding is about questioning, it's about talking, it's about thinking. The second step is about defining, right? It's like, okay, we understand all this space. So now let's define some limits. Let's define what we are going to solve with the time and resources we have. And because we think is important, right? So it's like boxing one part of that understanding of the situation, right? Then is ideating, it's like designing. So now that we understand, it's like let's ideate, let's bring everyone to propose things and create the best solution possible with this time, resources, and understanding of the situation. And then it's deciding, right? It's like, okay, now that we have the solution perfectly designed, let's decide what we can feasible, what we're feasible to build, right? What is feasible and in terms of resources and that, build it and launch it, right? So those four terms are also more abstract, but also applicable to this process as well.
That's excellent. I love it. Okay. You make it sound really easy to get into outcome-based thinking and action. But we know, as you said, the world's very complex. I think you once said it's, use the word fractal. So things can go wrong. So if someone's trying to be outcome-based, what could go wrong? What could cause them to end up retreating back into being output-based?
Yeah, well, I think we have already mentioned on the conversation that we can detect two levels, right? There's, a personal level, people level, and organization levels, right? So, I think that we can summarize that at the organizational level is what we mentioned before. There are dynamics, workflows in place, hierarchies, power, structure, and things like that sometimes are not open to change and not open to this ambiguity in how we are building products and experiences or running strategies, right? So that could be a first blocker, right? Like at the organizational level, it's like, is our organization open to change? How we do that progressively. And also at the personal level, I understand sometimes is just better to feel that you are doing your job, that you are cleaning the inbox, that you are performing your tasks, and that you feel productive more than thinking if you are really productive, right? And that's something that I feel a lot of times, right? Like running a company, founding firstly, then running, then being, like overseeing like everything we do. Sometimes I'm myself, I'm doing like that boxing thing in order to feel comfortable, right? Because if not, I can be always thinking about a lot of corners in the company, right? So at the personal level, we have to detect who is just overwhelmed, who just need help, but is willing to make the change, or who's just anti-change. Like they don't want to change anything. They feel comfortable what they're doing, and they don't see the motivation to change, right? That's also a thing. And as a final comment on that, I would say that in a company, it depends on the size, but I would say it's always good to be surrounded by people that is aligned with your vision in some way. If it's for your team, your overall company, your area, but there will be always people that are not aligned. And that's not a problem. That's part of it as well, right? So probably the job here is to find the people that you think that they have a mindset that is compatible with yours, and also can adopt change and try to, and they're trying to do things better, right? Because at the end of the day, change management is about that, right? Like evolution, trying to do things better. And also if we add the factor that the industry, especially the digital one, is changing like super rapidly every single year, month, and that, I mean, I would say that this is not an option. It's actually something that is part of our role, right? Our job.
Yeah, Well said. This was a great conversation. Again, I go back to what I said. When you boil it down, it's common sense. Be outcome focused versus output focused. But man, how many organizations are really doing it in every department, every area? Not a lot, right? It's so easy to retreat into that output, that am I meeting my metrics, right? I think sometimes people they get so comfortable and they hide in the metrics, right? And yet there's not necessarily some outcomes. I once worked with a sales rep who consistently broke his quota by 50%. The quota was $1 million. He did like 1.5 million consistently year after year. But yet he was always criticized because his close rate was 3%. And it's like, what do you care about? The outcome is that he's smashed his quota. He's, consistently smashed his quota. Why are you worried about the close rate? And there is some merit into the close rate, but they were so focused on the output, they weren't seeing the genius of the outcome. And I've seen lots of instances like that. So I think whether you're a sales leader, a marketing leader, an operations leader, think about what Hector is saying. Are you outcome based, or are you doing things for the sake of doing things, output based?
Yeah, I see that actually in my actual role as a CEO, like reviewing KPIs and metrics in a spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
That I know is important for this podcast. Sometimes there are like some metrics that if they're positive, you want to feel comfortable about it, like you want to feel fine about it. But then if you think deeply, is this metric actually an important thing for the company? For example, a services company said one. I always say the same, like when someone asks me about it, if you're a services company, sometimes your margin and EBITDA is way more important than revenue. I know that it's great to say like, oh yeah, we're smashing it like 50 million in revenue this year is like, and margin is like 1%. It's like, come on. I mean, it's like, what's the point there, right? So
Yeah.
that, and also in the product side, is very common that they call it vanity metrics, right? Like you can, oh, we have like 2 million active users every single day. It's like, oh yeah, but we don't have premium users, right? It's like, come on. I mean, like you have to define what you're trying to achieve, right? And finally, we need all this like motivation triggers from time to time, right? And there are like sometimes that we want to feel productive and things like that. I like it's a quote from Daniel Kahneman's partner in Thinking Fast and Slow. I think it's like sometimes we waste years in order to not waste hours thinking. So here I think it's the same. Sometimes we're doing a lot of stuff, like doing, and we don't take a minute to stop and think. It's like, is this what I'm doing like important, or I could do it better, or there's a way to do it better, or there's a trend that we're detecting here, right? So yeah, I mean, finally, it's an overall mindset, and I still think this is applicable to even overall life, but even at the personal level inside a company is something that is applicable from day one, I think. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Well, I know our listening audience, they'll reflect on their area of responsibility and start asking themselves the hard questions. Am I outcome based or output based? So I'm sure this is going to be valuable for a lot of our listeners. But the title of our program is When Spreadsheets Hit the Fan. So I need a spreadsheet story, good or bad. Do you have a quick one?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned him before. I co-founded the studio with Carlos. We started the studio 8 years ago, and I have been always more focused on, because well, said one, we create products, so we digital products. So I have been always more focused on product strategy, business strategy, design, even engineering side of the studio, right? And he was always more on the operational side, right? Like operations, finance, and that. So he's the master, the spreadsheet master in the company, right? Like every time that we need the spreadsheet, we ask him for it. But especially, I mean, it has been every month, every week for 8 years in a row, that every time that we want to review something, he puts together a spreadsheet, shares with me. I see the sharing notification. I open it, and I never understand it at the first look. Never. I see columns, I see rows, I see numbers, And always we have to jump on a call. It's like, man, I mean, can we review it together? It's like, and then after a couple of comments, maybe it's like, oh, I see. And why did you use this column title? Always is, oh man, I don't know. It's always the same problem. Bad. I have to say that it's always attacking my self-esteem, because every time I open a spreadsheet, it's like, come on, I'm managing a company of 100 people doing nice projects, and I cannot read a spreadsheet properly, right? So yeah, that's my fun story, and it's still happening. I mean, every single day.
Yeah, we see that a lot. One of the main reasons someone will buy our product is they've grown to a point where there's just too many spreadsheets, just doing too many things, that they need, a simpler way to do it, an auto way to do it, and they'll join our product Birdview PSA. So yeah, we can relate to that. Well, thanks, Hector. We're going to have you back real soon. It was a pleasure, and I'm going to start thinking about it in my personal life too. My outcome based or output based, right? So. It's been great.
Yeah. No, thank you for having me. It was a great conversation, and it's always good to have the opportunity to share some thoughts like this.
You've been listening to When Spreadsheets Hit the Fan, a Birdview podcast. Keep connected with us by subscribing to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you like what you've heard, please rate the show. That helps us to keep delivering the latest and best practices for professional service teams. Until next time.